Hello, welcome to Steve McDonald's Crafting, and I don't know if you remember me making this. I did this in a video a couple of weeks ago. It didn't take long to make, and I asked people if they'd like to see me mount it and do a little diorama around it, and there was a lot of comments that said yes, they'd like to see that. So this is the video showing that. If you haven't seen how I make this and you'd like to know, then I will link this at the end and also in the description below. I've got this old piece of polystyrene here. It probably came in some packaging of some sort and I always keep it. And I'm going to mount this on here, but before I do that I want to turn this into a different shape. I don't want it to be square. What I'm going to do is draw a circle around my pot so I know where the pot rim will be. And then I'm going to shape this now using a blade and carve this into something that is not just a square. And this stuff carves quite easy using a blade, especially the polystyrene that's made with the little tiny balls rather than big balls, because I do find the big balls are quite hard to handle. Bigger balls, they just keep slipping around in your hand and they break up a lot more than these smaller balls. I'm quite happy with that shape now, because once I finish it off it'll get nicely shaped up. Now you need to be careful when you're using a glue on this, because you want to be avoiding using a solvent glue. A solvent glue will melt the polystyrene, so try and avoid that, things like Yoo-hoo and those sorts of glues. So what I'm going to use a little bit of hot glue, and that can melt it if you're not careful, and also some white glue. So I'm ready to stick this on. I'm putting some white glue around the rim of this, and I'm going to glue that on there. And the reason I'm using this instead of all foam is the foam will make it nice and light, so it won't make it really heavy, and this is giving it a lot more rigidity as well for later on when I want to mount the tree on it. It'll be a lot easier to mount the tree on it. What I'm also going to do is I've broken up some smaller bits of polystyrene and I'm going to attach those in certain places going all the way around so it looks like rock formations. That'll hide that rim, but it'll also give it a little bit more visual impact. Well, I've got all the bits glued on that I wanted to glue on now, and it looks like a little bit like an iceberg, but it's not going to when it's finished. I've glued some loose rocks on, some bits around here to give it a bit of texture, and that'll come up really well once I've put the next stages on it. And then I can mount the tree on here, coming down with the roots coming over the rocks. Before I do anything else, what I want to do is, now this is all dry, is cover this right the way across everywhere with some white glue and brown paper. And this is all upcycled again. Everything that I've used here to make this has been upcycled. Empty yogurt pot, old packing pot, polystyrene, and now I'm using the brown paper that comes with the things that I get from Amazon. I'm going to overlap all this because you're not going to see any of this paper when it's finished anyway. That's the piece covered now in brown paper, and I'm going to let this dry probably overnight. Although it's quite a warm day here, it'll probably be dry in a few hours. But leaving it overnight will make sure that it's fully dry and all the polystyrene is dry as well. This is all nice and dry now and gone lovely and hard. I want to put a bit of texture on it, so I'm using ready-made filler here as I use often. Just going to give it a bit of a mix because it's probably settled out quite a lot, and I've had this one a nice long time, and it does keep a long time in the pots. I've got an old brush here, and what I'm going to do is just dip my brush in here and paint this on, pushing it in. I want to give it a bit more of a texture than the smooth texture that you get with just the paper, and this will dry really quickly and quite hard, ready for you to paint on. Now, I don't want my lines all going from a brush in the same direction, so now what I'm doing is just giving it a little bit of stipple as well with that brush to help with that texture. Yeah, I'm happy with that now, and what I will do is leave that for probably about half an hour to dry up, and then once it's dry I can start painting it and putting together the tree on the top. This is all dry now and it's lovely and hard, and I now need to paint it, and I'm going to do it using just the washes, really, using acrylic paint. I want to make up a grey to start with, and I'm going to make up a grey using obviously black and white, and just a straightforward black and white, and I'm doing it in my old yogurt pots because you know what I'm like. I like to save these things. Oh no, I don't want it too dark a grey. So let's see how that's going to come out. Now I want to put a bit of this into the other side of this, or if you haven't got another side, then add it onto your silicone mat or whatever else you're painting on. And now I'm going to add some water to this as well, and quite a bit of water, probably about a 50-50 wash for this. I want it to be very wet and watery. Let's mix all this in. And it's quite a hot day here, and also I want to ensure that I get a nice even coat, but it doesn't just grip everywhere on here. So I'm wetting down the plaster first as well. That won't affect that dried plaster that's on there. It'll stop that paint from gripping in too many places straight away. And now I'm going to make sure I get a good covering all over of this grey. You don't want any white showing at all on this. Now you want it all completely covered. So that's all completely covered. I'm going to let that dry now before I do the next stage. Well, now that's dry, what we can do is start putting some different tones and colours into it. Now, as you can see, that has dried with some different tones in it. And you probably could leave it like that, but I want it to look a little bit more realistic. So what I've got here is I've got some burnt sienna. I've got some burnt sienna and some burnt umber. And what I'm going to do is, again, wet the rock where I'm going to put these things. Now, the darker one, which is the burnt umber, that's going to be more for shadows and as if dirt has collected anywhere. Now, you need to move fairly quick with this, especially if it's a warm day like it is today, because what you don't want to happen is for it to dry out. You want to be able to keep moving it around. It's a warm day here. So I've got this. I'm just going to drop some bobs and bits of this all over randomly. I'm not too worried at the moment where I'm putting this. And that's the lighter colour. Okay, and now I'm going to add some water to my brush and just go through and move that about. And if you find that you get too much in one area, just put quite a bit more water on it, and you can dab it off with a paper towel while it's still wet. But you don't want to be covering the whole thing with this. You just want to be covering areas of it so it's kind of patchy. And that will give it a much more realistic look. And then once that dries, that will lighten up and the grey will start to show through that as well. Now, I'm also going to do the same with this burnt sienna, but I'm going to put that into areas like this here, where dirt would naturally, or a darker colour would naturally collect. So definitely there, bit there, coming through here, on all these ridges and bits and pieces. We took the time to do these with the polystyrene, so let's make the most of them. You can wait in between these coats to let it dry, and I actually prefer that. I'm not sure if it's because I'm colourblind and really I'm only going on the tones of things, or it just works better for me. But you can go on it wet if you want while it's still wet, but I find it much easier just to do each coat in between and allow them to dry. And if you want it a little bit darker in any areas, then just go over it again and just do the centre parts of those areas or those ridges or overhangs that you want to be darker. This is dry. Now what I'm going to do is go into these areas with a little bit of black. And again, I'm going to wet it all down, and I'm only really going to put the black where the crevices and the creases are. I'm going to put quite a lot of water in it to wash it right out. So I've just got a little bit of Mars black here. I'm going to put a bit in there to darken it. A bit coming off there, a bit coming up there. And I'm going to use my dirty water here to really wet that out. Look, can you see how wet out that's coming now? And I've also got a little bit of sap green that I'm going to put on here to make it look a little bit more mossy. Okay, and the sap green I'm going to wet down into more of a wash here on my mat. I don't want too much, but I want it where moss and things would grow. So on these edges, going round, a bit here. Quite a bit here, I would have thought, where the light gets in, and on that flat bit there. And now I'm going to go back to my very wet grey and water that down even more. And now I'm going to go over some of these ends and bits and pieces to tone it down and let some of that grey rock still come through. And then again, let that dry. It'll only take a few minutes to dry. And now I'm going to take a heavier brush like this. Dip that in, stipple that right into the tips of that brush. So it's all the way in. And then get rid of the majority of that off onto a paper towel. So it's really not doing, there's no paint really coming off. And this is where I'm going to just brush on some like highlights in certain areas with the dry brush. And that'll make parts of it really pop. And it'll only stick on to where it catches. Yep, happy with that. And now what I'm going to do is go another shade lighter and do exactly the same thing. And then I'll come back and I'll show you what it looks like. So now that's completely dry, the last job is to give it a couple of coats of matte varnish. And the reason I like to do that is it actually gives it a real tougher outer skin ready to put the tree on. And it sets it all in, and it, even though it's matte, it does give it a little bit more dimension of the rock as well. Although I think you'll agree that does come out looking quite good. Not bad for a colourblind boy. Well, now the rock's finished and dry, it's all about mounting this on here. And really what I need to do is decide which way I'm going to mount it on here. And what I would suggest you do is whenever you're mounting anything like this is bend the wires round a little bit and then start to bend them off the thing so you can get a better kind of bend to them. Because it's actually hard to bend things on here and keep them round once you've got it sitting there. So I've got that in the position I want. My glue gun's nice and hot. I don't want to over glue this because I don't want the glue to be popping out everywhere. I'm just putting a thin stream on the main roots of this. And then I can put it back down to where it was. Hold that in place. And now once I've got that in place, I can move around some of these thinner roots to get them into position. And that's it finished. I'm really pleased with how that's come out. I love the look of the tree. I mean, you don't have to set it onto something like this. You could set it on something, a normal piece of stone, piece of glass, anything. But I think the tree has come out really well, and the rock as well. Please boot that like button if you've enjoyed this. Don't forget to check out the video on how I made this tree. It is actually a lot simpler than you would think by looking at it. If you'd like to buy me a coffee or get hold of anything that I've used today or access any of the other really useful links that I've supplied, they're all in the description below. Take care, enjoy your crafting, bye.